Ooh, there it is. Man, I've been waiting for that. It is exciting to be back. I had the opportunity the last 3 weeks to be off, and it is good to be back. If you are new here this morning, I would like to welcome you. My name is Brett. I'm the lead pastor here at New Life Church. And for the last 3 weeks, we had a chance to get away as an elder group. When we came in, we talked about what does personal development look like, what does study time look like, and we put aside 3 weeks every year that I'll be taking where I'm going to take 2 weeks to study and 1 week really to focus personally on what it is that God is doing, how he's challenging me, and get some time in there to get away as well too. And so even though it's good to be back, I have to tell you, it was good to be away. No offense to any of you in this room, but it was nice to be gone. But while I was gone, I want to thank Matt Swigert, who had an opportunity to be up here with Lead 222, and Sammy Wanyoni from Merge Ministries, and Grant, who's our associate pastor, each one. It was neat. We had the chance to watch remotely, right? We live stream every Sunday. And so we got to watch it. And the last couple of Sundays, I have access to the playlist for all the songs. We actually played the songs that we were going to sing here together by ourselves where we were at, and we sang the songs, and then we turned the message on, and so it felt like we were here, kind of. And yet my kids loved it. In fact, woke up this morning, and one of my little ones said, "Hey, Dad, can we do church like we did the last couple of weeks?" It's like, no, we actually have to be there today, and yet it is really good to be back. You know, while we were away, part of it was planning, part of it was looking forward, part of it was getting excited about this upcoming year, and yet it didn't go exactly the way that I had thought, which usually is way better than you could ever imagine, right? God stepped into the middle of it and really challenged me and in many ways humbled me and yet encouraged me and motivated me for this upcoming year. And so we're starting that right now. It's hard to believe it's year 2 together already. In fact, we're going to be kicking off our ministry year on September 8th and 9th, but really we're kicking it off today. Today's the beginning as we go into year 2, and we're starting a new series today called Stepping Up. What does that mean? What does stepping up look like? What are we talking about specifically within this series? Well, it's not necessarily stepping up in the sense that I want to take on more responsibility or I need to do more. Stepping up really is more like this ladder sitting over here. As we talk about stepping up, my hope is that as believers in our journey every day, all throughout our lives, wherever we're at, that our goal is every day to take another step up. Well, what's that step up in relation to? Well, that step up is our hope, our desire that we become more like Christ. As we become more like Christ, our desire is to continue to take steps up this ladder. Now, as I climb up this ladder, am I climbing closer to salvation? Am I getting closer to earning something? Well, the answer is no. As a church, we believe that salvation comes through faith alone, but once we've come to know who Jesus Christ is, it's our responsibility to become more like him. And so our hope is to continue to climb, right? To get closer and closer and closer to God as we become more like Christ. And so each one of us is starting somewhere, way down there at the bottom. As you're standing at the base of this ladder, you're starting somewhere in your faith journey. Maybe you're starting at the very beginning. Maybe you don't know who Jesus Christ is, your personal Lord and Savior. Maybe you're here today going, what's this church thing all about? Well, hopefully in this series, you'll get some of those answers. Or maybe you've been on a journey with Christ for years and years and years, and yet until the day we are done here, we still have work to do. We still have more steps to climb. I'll tell you, it's pretty cool being this high. I'll also tell you, I am height advantaged, right? That's what you call somebody who's tall. I don't have any issues seeing over crowds. One thing that I've learned in my life is that as I become more Christ-like, I see more clearly. I see what's going on in the world in a way that I've never seen before. And as I climb this ladder, I can say the exact same thing. As I am way up here, I can see more clearly. In fact, I can see the people in the back of these little cool things we have up here, which I can't see from down there. I can see clearly. And so our hope is as we take steps up this ladder, as we become more like Christ, we can see more clearly. and that we continue our journey with Christ every single day. Every day. So use this illustration this week as you are in your time with Christ, as you're becoming more Christ-like, that we are in this series stepping up. And so we're focused on our 4 priorities: pursue, connect, serve, reach. And so today we're starting with our first priority of pursue. Pursue God daily, every day, in every moment. And as we begin this series, I want to ask a question to you. Is it easier for you to pursue God in the good times or in the bad times? If you were to think about your faith journey, wherever you're at, as you've gone through your life, is it easier for you to pursue God in the good times or the bad times? For me, it's actually easier for me to pursue God in the good times. When things are going well, it is super easy to be excited, to be thankful, to be in relationship with God, to be reading my Bible, to be going, woo, everything is great. God, you are so good. I'm more likely to share with people what's going on when things are good, right? God, you are in this moment. I can't wait to tell somebody about it. What I've found in my life is that it's harder for me to pursue God in the bad times. In fact, as I get into those bad times, I end up asking a lot of questions. God, where are you? What are you doing? What's the outcome look like? Where are we going? Now, people come to know God during the bad times. There are individuals that actually grow closer to God, and there are moments of salvation. In fact, statistically in our country right now, as an adult, you're most likely to come to know Jesus Christ, your personal Lord and Savior, because of a trial that you have gone through. People come to know who God is in trials. They come to know him as their personal Savior through trials as he pulls them out of that. But as you think about your ongoing walk, as you think about the times that you've experienced, is it easier in the good times or the bad times? And we'd probably have to say that in the bad times, it's hard to walk with God. It's hard to be there. And yet what I have learned in my life and what we're going to see today as we talk about pursuing God is that the bad times are really oftentimes the moments where we can grow closest to God. And that if I am willing to pursue God in the bad times, if I am willing to pursue God in the trials, I will see his goodness if I'm willing to wait. And that's what we're going to be focused on today. We're going to look at Psalm 27, and we're going to be focused on that statement. If I pursue God in the bad times, I will see his goodness if I am strong enough to wait. And that's what David tells us. So open with me this morning, Psalm 27. We're going to be digging into Psalm 27. If you don't have a Bible, I'd love to give you one. In fact, you may notice that we do not have Bibles underneath the seats here at New Life Church, and we do that for a reason. We want everybody to own one. We want everybody to have their own Bible. We don't have one available for you under the seats, but we have one available to give to you, so you're not just reading it today, but you're reading it all the time. Every day, all year long. And if you don't want a hard copy, you can download one on any device. Go to the App Store. We use the Bible app. You're going to follow along with our notes. You can save them in there. You can access them later. And we're going to be talking today, Psalm 27. And we're going through, and we're going to kind of take it piece by piece. And so we're going to start in Psalm 27, verse 1. And it begins this way. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? When the wicked advanced against me to devour me, it is my enemies and my foes who will stumble and fall. Though an army besiege me, my heart will not fear. Though war break out against me, even then I will be confident. Well, we can see at the very beginning of this psalm as it's King David who's writing. We know that David is the author, and David was an individual that went through a number of different things. His life was not easy by any means. And you can see in the beginning of this, just in the first 3 verses, that David's going through something. That there's a trial, that there's something that's happening here, that he is saying a number of different things in relation to his relationship with God to encourage himself and to encourage us as he's in the middle of a trial. Many people have wondered what specific trial was David going through in this, what it was that was coming against him, what enemies did he have that were attacking him, and there are a number of things that you could look at, a number of situations that may be the case, but many believe that it was the situation with his son Absalom. If you're familiar with that, Absalom was his son who tried to take over his kingdom, and actually for a short period of time found a way to do so, and in doing so, David had to flee. David fled the kingdom and was afraid for his life and ran because there were people coming after him. And Absalom took over the kingdom and was quite wicked in his short period of time as king. And David came back through God's grace and ended up taking over the kingdom again. And there's a good chance that David is writing this either in the middle of that rebellion or shortly after that rebellion. So we know he's going through a hard time. Another thing we know about King David, though, is that he was a man that was in very close relationship with God. When King David was young, he was anointed king, and in the process of anointing king, God told the one to anoint him that you will go to Jesse's family and you will find this man who is a man after God's own heart. We see in David's life that he was in relationship with God from a very young age, from the very beginning, all the way through all of his trials and situations. And so as David is writing this, he's a man that has pursued God for many years. He's in the middle of trials. He's in the middle of a lot of stuff that is happening. And his words are a challenge to us as we think about where we're at and the next step in our relationship. How can we be more like Christ? Well, we can be challenged by David's words. The first challenge out of these first 3 verses is this: I will pursue God in the midst of fear. As David's going through a situation, it's very clear that he is fearful. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is a stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? We can deduce from those statements that he's making those statements because there was some that he potentially had to fear. There was someone that was out to get him. If it wasn't Absalom's rebellion, David's life was in jeopardy. There were people that were coming after him. And so he's encouraging himself by saying, who do I have to be afraid of? Nobody. Nobody. Why? Because the Lord is my light and my salvation. He is my stronghold. When fear leaps in, when armies come against me, when I am besieged, my heart will not fear. The war break out against me, even then will I be confident. As we think about pursuing God in the good times and the bad times, one of the bad times that may be hard to pursue God is when we're fearful. We live in a world today that I'd have to argue is ruled by fear. Ruled by fear. Maybe not the same types of fear that David had. I don't walk out thinking that somebody's coming after me or that my position here at New Life is in jeopardy because some coup is going to happen and I'm going to flee for my life. But we have real fears just the same. We have things that we deal with every day that can consume us, that can cause us to sit there going, I don't even know if I can walk out of my house today. As I read the news and I look at the world around us, there are newer fears and more fears and bigger fears that continue to come after us that cause us to sit there going, what is going on? In fact, there was one I read about this week, and it's kind of funny and kind of not all at the same time. The headline said this: therapists now seeing patients with Trump derangement syndrome. That was the headline. It caught me. I was like, I need to read about that. Therapists now seeing patients with Trump derangement syndrome. But it got pretty serious within the first 2 paragraphs. It says this: therapists around Washington, D.C. are noticing a sharp increase in patients describing symptoms of what has been called Trump derangement syndrome. There's a fear of the world ending, said D.C. Counseling and Psychotherapy Center founder Elizabeth Lamott, referring to some of President Donald Trump's decisions. It's very disorienting and constantly unsettling. Lamott described an uptick in her patients describing what the right refers to as Trump derangement syndrome. Is he going to blow us all up? One of her patients asked. It's a legitimate fear. It's a real thing today that all of a sudden the conversation about the end of the world is coming back, and we may have a leader who's in position leading us towards that direction. Well, you know what's really great? As individuals who believe in the Bible, you know what we can actually say? They're right. Because every leader that has ever been put in place is leading us towards the end of the world. Hallelujah. Woo! Now, is he going to blow us all up? I don't know. That would probably be bad. I don't want that to happen. But it's a legitimate fear. Is the world coming to an end? There are fears in our world today, right? Terrorists. Terrorists are a legitimate fear. A number of years ago, we lived in Illinois, and there was a thing that was put out that there were going to be all these malls that were going to be attacked. And the mall right down the street from our house was one of the malls on the list. And I'll tell you, I didn't want to go into that mall. What was the chances it was actually going to happen? It didn't happen, but there was this fear inside of me where I sat there going, what if something bad happened in that mall? or shootings in schools or any public places. You walk out of your house nowadays and there's a chance, there's a legitimate chance. Or how about germs? We're told to be fearful of germs, politicians, health issues, health insurance issues, life transitions, major decisions. People are not leaving their homes because they can't decide between one thing or another. They're living in fear. Or how about loved ones, friends, maybe even myself, falling back into a destructive way of medicating the pain that I'm going through physically or mentally. Or marriages that are teetering on the edge of the abyss, the downfall of our families, the ruin of our society. There are all sorts of things to fear, and I haven't even mentioned spiders and snakes. Right? Man, those things are creepy. And we run from them, and yet here, as I was thinking about this, I'm like, why am I fearful of, spiders I'm fine with, but snakes, man, whoo. Like, that's just, And yet, here's like the reality of fear. There's a song on the radio right now that says, fear is a liar, right? Fear lies to you. See, snakes and spiders, I've never known anybody that has actually been harmed by either one of them. I personally don't know a single person that has been harmed by a snake or a spider. I'm sure many of you in here may have, or someone does, but here's what I don't want. I don't want that story, okay? I tell you all the time, I want to hear your stories. I want to hear what God's doing. Yeah, don't tell me a snake or spider story. I don't want it. I want to be able to get over my fear. See, as we walk through our world today, there doesn't seem to be much that's safe anymore, that we have to fear at all. And yet David says, of what should I be afraid? Nothing. In fact, as I draw closer to God in my fear, as I pursue God in my fear, I learned this very key lesson. In my fear, just like David, I can be confident I have nothing to fear. In my fear, just like David, I can be confident I have nothing to fear. Why was David confident that he had nothing to fear? Very simply in the first verse, because God was his light, right? Where is fear most prevalent? In the dark. Fear is most prevalent in the dark. And when we are in the dark, or we are in a dark world, or we are consumed by darkness, fear runs rampant. There's a perfect illustration this week in my subdivision of darkness and fear. Half of my subdivision has streetlights, the other half does not. And there's a lot of tall trees, and if you come in the backside of our subdivision as you drive in, there is no light. And it is dark, and it is creepy, and it's scary, and there's all these big pine trees that you wonder what's just going to kind of float out of one. Right? Spiders. Or big giant bats that turn into vampires or werewolves and it's fearful. And then you get into the other half where there's light, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, I can go outside in the dark. David said, God, I have nothing to fear because you are my light. He lived in a world of dark. Think about it. There were no lights in this time. There was no electricity. When the sun went down, it was dark. My worst fears come at night. In fact, I have to limit the conversations I have with my wife at times because we can go down this rabbit trail because everything is worse at night, right? Have you ever sidelined a conversation, said, we'll talk about it in the morning, it will be better then? Why? Because it's light outside. In your fear, God is the light, and you can be confident that you have nothing to fear because, as David said, he is your light. He goes on, verse 4, one thing I ask from the Lord, this only do I seek, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze on the beauty of the Lord and to seek him in his temple. For in the day of trouble he will keep me safe in his dwelling. He will hide me in the shelter of his sacred tent and set me high upon a rock. Our second challenge coming out of this as we pursue God is this: I will pursue God before the day of trouble. I will pursue God before the day of trouble. David asked for only one thing: to dwell in the house of the Lord forever. And he had two reasons for that. And the first one was he wanted to see the Lord's beauty. He wanted to gaze on the face of God. He wanted to behold God. This only do I ask, that I dwell in your house. So for the first reason, he could see the beauty of God. Do we pursue God so we can see his beauty? Do we pursue him in times of trouble so we can gaze on his beautiful face? And if we were to gaze on his beautiful face, what would that look like? I had a chance this past weekend to be up in the North Shore. People had talked about it. It was gorgeous. It was beautiful. But there was a moment that I was surprised by that I had not anticipated. We'd put our itinerary together. We had it all planned out. We were going to see beautiful things. And we happened to be down on Canal Street, or right there, Canal Park. And that's where the boats come in. And we were sitting there, and we were about to leave. And this gentleman just kind of pokes his head into our group. And he goes, "Are you guys tourists?" And we're like, "Yes, we are." And he goes, "In about half an hour, there's a boat out on the horizon that will be making its way in. If you can hang around for a half an hour, it's quite a sight to see." And so we did. We hung around for a half an hour. And I tell you, I did not anticipate it, but it was incredible. I took a couple pictures of it. This was the boat that showed up. We watched it come in off the horizon. As it got closer, you're sitting there going, is it large? Is it like, how big is it? It looked at first like something small, and then it was like a fishing vessel, and then as it got closer and closer and closer, it was incredible. And so as we sat there, this whole pier is lined up with people, and you know what they were doing? They're just staring. They're just gazing at this ship, just watching it in awe and wonder at the beauty of this massive thing just floating on the water as it went by. And I found myself doing the same thing, just staring at it. What's kind of funny is there was a guy standing on the deck of the boat who was doing the same thing back to us. He was staring at us. Why are they looking at me? As it passed by, as we saw it disappear, I sat there going, I want it to come back. I want to see it again. I don't want it to be over. Think about staring at the beauty of God. Will we all be lined up just looking at him? Just in awe? And David says, I want to be in your house. I want to pursue you. First, because I just want to look at you. I just want to see you. Second, then, he says, I want to be in your house for this reason, that you will keep me safe when trouble comes. For in the day of trouble, he will keep me safe in his dwelling. He will hide me in the shelter of his sacred tent and set me high upon a rock. See, David knew that trouble would come. A reality of life is that trouble will come. Was David fearful of it? No. Because in the middle of fear, he was confident that God would be his light and his salvation, but he knew trouble would come. But see, here's what he was pointing us towards, is that we need to be in pursuit of God before the day of trouble comes. See, David knew trouble was coming. He said, before that, I want to dwell in your house. I want to pursue you. I want to see your face. For when trouble comes, you will keep me safe. See, oftentimes when trouble does come, that's when we run to God. That's when we pursue God. When the moment hits where we're like, oh man, I can't take it anymore. I need to run to God. And David's telling us, no. Before the day of trouble comes, you must come to me. That I will pursue God before trouble comes, because then we have the same promise that David does. When trouble does come, in the day of trouble, God will keep me safe. That when I pursue him before that, and I dwell in his house, and I stare at his face, he will keep me safe. David goes on in verse 7, hear my voice when I call, Lord, be merciful to me and answer me. My heart says of you, seek his face. Your face, Lord, I will seek. Do not hide your face from me. Do not turn your servant away in anger. You have been my helper. Do not reject me or forsake me, God. Though my father and mother forsake me, the Lord will receive me. Challenge number 3, I will pursue God when I feel forsaken. See, relationship with David and God was something that was ongoing. He was there from the beginning, which you can see acknowledged with this comment right here. Do not turn away from your servant in anger, for you have been my helper. Prior to this situation, God had been David's helper, and we see that. Again, if this is the situation with Absalom, if this is the real rebellion, there have been many things along the way that have led to this point where God has helped David through them, even when David turned his back and was the one that left God. When David was the one that rebelled, when David ran away, God was still there in his rebellion. And David says now that God, do not leave me, which he hadn't really experienced. God had been there the whole time. But can you blame David that he still had this fear? He still had this thought that even though God had been there through the whole situation, through everything, even when David had run away, God had still been there. He had not failed him. David's pleading to him, please do not forsake me. In the middle of this trial, in the middle of this situation, please do not turn your back on me, because David had many people in his life that had. His mentor had walked away from him. One of his wives had walked away from him. His son had now walked away from him, was trying to kill him. And David says, conceivably, even my mom and my dad could forsake me. So God, please do not forsake me. He makes this great statement then in verse 10. Though my father and mother forsake me, the Lord will receive me. See, I think many of us can relate to David through this, because there probably are people in our lives that have done that. They've walked away from us. They've left us. Just like David, individuals that were close, that we love, that were near and dear to us have said, you know what, I don't want to be a part of what's going on in your life anymore. And they may have actually even turned and become our enemies. And what we can't do, what David's kind of doing in this situation, is he's taking what they had done to him and he's transposing that on God. He's saying, God, these people in my life have forsaken me. Please do not do that. Even if my mother and father do that, do not do that. See, I believe we do the same thing. That we're in the midst of a trial. When we're in hardship, we can run from God because we believe that God will run from us, because people have done the same thing to us. And we take what others have done to us and we transpose that then on God, and we say, God, do not leave me. And God says, I will not. I will not leave you. I may be silent. I may not answer your prayers in your time, but I will not forsake you. I will receive you. And we can then have the confidence, as David says in verse 10, that even though my mother and father may forsake me, that the Lord will receive me. So we can know that when we pursue God in the midst of trials, that God will receive me when others won't. That God will bring me in when others won't. And when God does receive us, we can rejoice, as David says in verse 6, then my head will be exalted above the enemies who surround me. At his sacred tent I will sacrifice with shouts of joy. I will sing and make music to the Lord. Teach me your way, Lord. Lead me in a straight path because of my oppressors. Do not turn me over to the desire of my foes, or false witnesses rise up against me, spouting malicious accusations. I remain confident of this. I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Fourth challenge, I will pursue God and see his goodness. I will pursue God in the midst of trials and hardship, and I will see his goodness. Like David, when we pursue God in the midst of trial, we will be able to rejoice. We will be able to say that God has lifted me high. We will be able to sing and make music to the Lord. He will direct our paths. When oppressors are all around us, he will show us the way to go. Teach me, Lord, your way because of my oppressors. I cannot see the way out. Lead me in a straight path, and God will do that for us. And like David, we can say in verse 13, I remain confident of this. I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. See, that's an incredible statement, because if this was after the rebellion, I don't know what David could have called goodness in that situation? And I'll leave that up to you to read the story of David and Absalom. But what was David referring to as goodness? David is referring to God's goodness and that God's plan is better than our plan, even when we cannot see it. And see, the goodness isn't the end goal in mind. When David looked back, he saw the journey he'd been on. He said, God, now that I am here, I can look back and I can see your goodness. I can see your faithfulness. Not that everything will turn out perfect, not that everything will be dandy, not that your prayers will be answered exactly the way that you want them to be. But we will see God's goodness in the land of the living. The journey we have taken, we will be able to look back and say, God, you are good. But here's the key to it. Verse 14, wait for the Lord. Be strong and take heart and wait for the Lord. Number 5, I will pursue God even when I must wait. I have a hard time pursuing God in the middle of bad things because I don't have patience. I want it now. I have a hard time with that last verse because as David is telling us all this stuff, he gets to the very end and his summation statement is, wait. I will see your goodness, but I must wait on the Lord. And then he says, I must be strong and courageous to wait on the Lord. February 2016 is when God poked me. It's the moment I knew that it was time to leave where I was at. And I can tell you the exact moment. I can tell you the exact thing that God used. I can tell you the exact situation. And it was 16 months from the time that God poked me to the time that I started on staff here at New Life Church. And I tell you, those 16 months might be the longest period of time in my whole life. And yet now I think about it, you're like 16 months? I can put up with 16 months, right? You know, it was perfectly split. It was 8 months and 8 months. The first 8 months was me wrestling with God. God, what are you doing? I don't get this. I don't understand this. I don't know why this is happening. I was pretty content right here, and now this is happening. And I can tell you in the middle of that, there was fear. There were days of trouble. And there were days I felt forsaken. And there was a moment, the church I'd been a part of, there was a pond out back. There was a very clear moment where I walked out of the service and I had to go be alone, and I sat by this pond. And I screamed at God. Because I knew my time there was over. It was finished, and yet I didn't get why. And then I had to come to the place where I said, okay, God, it's yours, not mine. I'm going through all this time. And in that moment, I wanted to push God as far away as I possibly could. And I wanted to say, no, God, I'm not doing this. This is not what I wanted. This isn't what I planned. Why are you doing this to me? And I tell you, it was the craziest thing. I sat there. And this is in August, okay? Almost a year ago, or 2 years ago today. And I'm sitting there, and a duck hops into the pond. And the duck starts swimming across the pond, and as she starts swimming across the pond, she's got 3 little ducklings right behind her. And these are like babies, which is weird in August, right? There shouldn't be baby ducklings in August. This mom had her timing way off. She didn't know what she was doing. Or maybe all the good guys were already taken. I don't know. And she swims across this little pond. The ducklings get up on the bank on the other side of the pond, and she stands there and she just guards them. And she watches them. And I felt God very clearly say, I've got you. But you're going to have to wait. I didn't know at the time, but as I was reading this first verse in this passage, God was saying, I am your light. I will direct your path. I am your salvation. I am your stronghold, but I need you to wait. A couple months later, I got in contact with New Life Church. It was just a coincidence. It really was. There was no reason why it should have happened. And I got in touch with the search team, and the conversation began. And what God had done in the first couple of months of that, the first 8 months, was to get me ready for what was about to come. And at that point, then I was like, okay, God, I'm in this. You got this. I know what you're doing. Come on, let's go. And I was ready. Like from the word go, I was ready. There were no other options. I was not looking anywhere else. I knew New Life Church is what I was supposed to do. It was where I was supposed to be. But you know what the search team told me through the middle of this process? Wait. Just wait. We got this process. I'm like, okay, I want to honor the process. And they did a great job with the process. And I want to tell you, it was amazing. And we got to the point in the process where it was very clear the process was over. Just end it right now. This is it. And then I got the word back that, you know what? We need a little more process. What? What does that even mean? I don't even think they knew what that meant, right? They didn't even know what more process meant. They did. They knew what it meant. And it was exactly what was supposed to happen. I'm having a conversation with Matt Engstrom around that time. He was the head of the search team at the time. And Matt and I are going back and forth, and I'm like, dude, I am ready. Let's make this happen. We need more process. Okay. And the analogy was used, I was like a Ferrari at a red light waiting for it to turn green. Right? I was ready. Matt said, wait, we need more process. So I'm in this moment with God. Okay, God, what are you doing? I just don't get it. If there is somebody out there that wants this job and is feeling like they're called to this job like me, and I don't get this job, I have no idea what you are doing. I have no clue what's going on. And so I'm wrestling with God, and it was a long period of wrestling. And I'm driving by this little Baptist church about a mile from my house. And they got one of those signs outside, right, that you change out. They've got those little statements and all that stuff. And I never read them. Typically, I don't. For some reason, I'm driving by. I'm doing 55 miles an hour on this road. And I happen just to glance over. Literally, it was a glance. And I look over. And I don't even really think that I was able to see what was actually on the sign, but it was burned into my brain. It was Psalm 27:14. And it said, wait on the Lord. I had to look it up, right? I had to see what was the whole verse. And it said, wait on the Lord, be strong and courageous, wait on the Lord. For the first time in my life, I had thought of waiting as being strong and courageous. The most strong and courageous thing that I could have done in that moment was to wait. See, it would have been easy for me as that Ferrari to call up Matt and to pepper him and to, say, hey, let's go, come on, and try to push the process forward. And yet God said, no, I got this. They need more process. But really what God was saying was, Brett, you need more process. I'm not done processing you. The time of waiting came to an end, and what I realized is that coming to New Life wasn't God's goodness, even though that's been great. It was the journey along the way where I went back and said, I have seen God's goodness in the land of the living. I have seen fear. I have seen trouble. I have seen people walk away. And yet, God, you are good. I have seen God's goodness. So as you think about your journey, as you think about where you're at in pursuing God, if you're in one of those moments today, you can hold on to this promise that if I pursue God in the middle of trials, that I will see his goodness if I am strong enough to wait. Because if I pursue God in the middle of fear, He is my light. If I pursue God in the middle of trouble, He is my Savior. If I pursue God when I have been forsaken, He is my stronghold. He is my light, my salvation, and my stronghold. I want to be a church. I want to be a people that pursue God in every situation. But the next step up this ladder is in the good times and the bad times, we will keep our journey going. We will be a church that becomes more like Christ. And when we are finished with our walk, or we are halfway through our walk, or we're just beginning our walk, we can look at the journey and we can say, God, I have seen your goodness. And as we become more like Christ, we can see the world around us and say, I can see more clearly. God, you are good. In the middle of all of it, you are good. So pursue God every day. Every day. Before trial happens, in the middle of fear, when you have been forsaken, because God's goodness will be seen if we are strong enough to wait. Will you pray with me? God, you are good. All the time you are good. And we may